They say millennials will never buy a home, so let's talk about it because we're millennials. My name is Carmen.
And I'm Darius. And yes, they say millennials will never buy a home, but this is just a blog that I was reading where it said millennials won't ever buy a home. So we want to give you our perspective on that since we're millennials. Well, technically millennials. We're older millennials, but we're still millennials.
We still check the box.
We still check the box.
So the committee of they says that millennials won't buy homes. And so we thought this was actually a juicy topic because when you think about like historically buying a home was such a trophy. It was a significant thing that people did either for status and or accomplishment so that they could say, hey, they can, wave that flag
and say, yes,
I'd check the white picket fence box.
Yeah.
And what do we do there? So why do you think maybe historically things have started to change and people don't value homeownership the way they used to?
I think just based on my experience, there's been such a swing in our housing market and economy that affects the way we're able to save for a house or maintain a job so that we can pay for a house, how we change jobs frequently more than the previous generation. I think all of that goes into effect that really makes it more difficult for us to take the necessary steps as a whole to save up for a house and purchase a house and maintain those payments.
Yeah. And I would also say too, I find it interesting. I was thinking about this topic as we were planning for the video is I also think technology plays a big role into this because when you think about technology, things are constantly changing. Cars, we had to relearn how to drive a car based off all of the technical packages that we had because we had an older car and bought a newer one and we were like, what are all these buttons? So I think when we also apply that to the housing market and realizing that how technology has significantly changed our lives, we are moving and grooving and out and doing so much more than we used to do than our parents' generation, where it was just about raising the children and going to work and that and the other. And now we're traveling all over the world. The Instagram pics, everything, it's just, we're not as settled as we used to be. Yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to say at the end of the day is we're all over the place now. Traveling is a lot more sexy than what it used to be. It's a lot more affordable than what it used to be. And people just aren't settled at home wanting to have roots.
Yeah, and I think our parents, when they bought a house, they were planning on being there for 30 years.
Yeah, raising their children in it.
When they started a job, they were planning on being at that job forever. They were planning on, when they started a job, they were planning on retiring from that job. So when it comes to us millennials, that's not necessarily the case. We go from job to job, whichever one pays us the most money, more frequently than our parents.
Totally.
And we also only stay in a house for about 5 years on average.
If that, yeah.
On average, we'll stay in one place for about 5 years and then we'll move someplace else. And what happens is we end up just paying interest payments because interest is front loaded for the first 7 years. We just spend money on interest. When we sell that house, we don't have a lot of money to roll into another house because of the frequency in which we move. So yeah, I agree with you. The fact that we don't stay still long enough goes into effect with that. The fact that we don't manage our money the same way our parents did has an effect on it because again we like to do things, we like to be out, and I don't think we necessarily plan as far in the future as our parents did either.
Ooh, that's a good point. Yeah, I don't think so either. I think we're planning like annually, maybe 3 years out, whereas our parents definitely plan for 5, 10 years out, I would say.
Yeah, and it's because what was ingrained into them from their parents. It was said that you have a house, you have kids, and that's the American dream. Now we are starting to think of the American dream as being something different, and a home isn't necessarily a priority for us versus having different experiences. And then on top of that, a lot of us are going to college and we're graduating from college with a ton of debt, and which doesn't allow us to save, and we can't do that.
Yeah,
our parents they didn't necessarily have to go to college to get a good job.
Yeah, it's so true that the market is a lot more competitive now. And the other thing that I'd like to do, maybe switching gears just slightly, is, since we talk about money on this channel, I think it's important that we talk about money in this instance. Is I think now in the digital world that we live in, there's so many more avenues for us to create assets. And we always looked at our house as like the asset, because that was the one that was going to be the biggest moneymaker. And now that we realize with the market and things are constantly changing, a lot of times our houses become liabilities because they're just continuing to take money out of our pockets, and they're not appreciating the way that they used to do, because the market is up, down, round and round. And then the cost of ownership is so significant these days. So for a millennial, in my perspective, those are things that I'm starting to look at. Like, you know what, I could rent, have amazing amenities, and call the handyman and not have to worry about saving for repairs and all that type of stuff. And since I'm moving, grooving, traveling and whatnot, my house isn't staying vacant, you know, on the block. At least I'm in an apartment, things like that. So I just, for me, when I think about assets now these days, I'm looking to other things as opposed to the home that I live in. Don't get me wrong, we invest in real estate, but the home that we live in, it needs to be an asset and not a liability. And so you have to make sure that you're always positioning yourself to have assets and not liabilities.
So you rent where you live and you buy where you rent? Well, one model that Carmen and I took is the fact that we rent where we live and we buy where we want to rent, where we want to invest. So we own the properties in which we invest, but where we actually live, we rent. Because what that allows us to do is our investments pay for where we live, which is a really good handoff because it allows us to move wherever we want to in this country.
It's just a different perspective on how you think about things, because typically people buy where they live, and they don't think about making that purchase an investment where it's cash flowing.
Right. But it's something that you have to work to. And the reason why having a house or as an asset, I think everyone should have a house, because wealth is measured for the middle class based on their property, owning a home. And if we don't own a home or any investments, then our wealth is significantly affected. Our ability to go and get loans and just manage money is something that we can't pass on to the next generation. A lot of generations, what they do is they pass on these houses. Like, for example, the house our parents are in, she bought it at $400,000. She stayed in that house for 20 years now, and by the time it's passed on to us, the house will be worth a lot more money. And that's how people are able to pass on wealth to the next generation. So as a millennial, who
doesn't have that,
it has to start somewhere. And if our parents isn't leaving it to us, then it has to start with our generation. And I think a lot of millennials are opting for the experience versus the wealth.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's also up to the millennials then, if we're speaking to the millennial audience, is you have to make sure, to your point, like, what are the things that you're creating where you can pass down to the next generation? Because sometimes we tend to just look at immediate gratification and forget, years behind us. What are we going to do for our children, for our grandchildren, and things like that? And so if it's not a house that you have, what other assets are you accumulating that will allow your children and your grandchildren to have a little bit of wealth that you're building?
A business.
Yeah, a business, whole life insurance policies, for example. If you're new to the channel, definitely click on the link below. That was a nice segue, where you can learn about how Darius and I teach our clients how to finance their own lifestyles. If you are thinking about financing a house and things of that nature, or even investing, definitely click on the link below, because we'll show you how to do it by creating your own banking system.
The easiest thing to pass on to the next generation is a home, because you don't have to do anything with that house, and it appreciates and it over time, and it keeps up with inflation, because the higher inflation goes, the more that asset is going to be worth.
Yeah. So for our millennials, it's important for you to, if you think about investing, then you can buy a home, but don't necessarily buy a home to live in it. Buy a home for it to cash flow and let someone else pay for that mortgage. And then once that mortgage is paid off, we're just sitting on a gravy boat, just sitting on equity. You're continuing to have tenants live in there. Maybe you can live it there at some point, but you've established some sort of wealth building asset where you can then pass that on to the next generation.
Yeah, and it's really important for us to check into the game, because the longer we wait, it's not a scale that just sits there. It's a moving scale. So the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be for us to get into a property, or to at least set up the habits that allow us to purchase a property for an investment or to actually live in.
Yeah, and I think what we need to clear up
that's exactly why millennials will never buy a house, is because one thing is we're not saving for that house or taking the necessary steps to make it in an investment. We're thinking about right now versus 30 years from now.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I was going to say. I feel like we need to clean this up because we started talking about why we wouldn't buy a house. We could come to find out we actually do.
Not why we wouldn't buy a house, because we got two of them.
No,
why,
but you know what I mean.
Millennials will never buy a house.
Yeah. So what we don't want you to do, millennials, is get stuck into the trap of, oh, I'm not going to buy a house. I'm just going to rent for the rest of my life. And that's fine because we're currently renting too. But what we're also saying is with that same mentality, we need to be thinking about assets and wealth creation and those things. So if you don't want to buy a house to live in, then look at buying a duplex, buying a quad, whatever it is, so that you
or
can...
a mobile home. You don't have to buy a whole house. Buy a mobile home and baby step this thing to where you can get that house.
In addition to the other assets, because I know for millennials, cryptocurrency is a huge thing too. So when we think about asset classes, don't always put all of your eggs in one basket. Make sure you spread it around so that you can truly diversify, and that if you have crypto, maybe you are looking into some sort of real estate. You have precious metals. You know, go down the line as far as the asset classes are concerned, and making sure that you're covering your butt, because we know millennials, we know the attention span that we tend to have, and it's important that you get your ducks in a row to ensure that the you 10 years from now, 15 years, 20 years from now is being set up correctly.
And if you want more information on how to buy a house without going broke, then check out our next video where we talk about how to buy a house without going broke.
And don't forget to own your own lifestyle, Wealth Nation.
Or someone else will.